Hi everybody, welcome to Simply Scuba and welcome to Ask Mark, where I do my best to answer all of your intriguing questions. If you've got any questions about scuba diving or snorkeling or apnea or whatever, let me know down in the comments below. If you use the hashtag AskMark, it kind of files it to one side so that I can see it and then put it on the next week's show. This week we are talking about Sidemount BCDs, basic maths or mathematics, Dsmbs, towing tips, the quarter turn rule, and wetsuit fitting. So let's dive straight in with the first question, which this week comes from Baking and Breaking, and they say, "Hi Mark, love the videos, thank you. My buddy and I are relatively new, but thinking about how we're going to be diving in the future. My buddy really struggles with kitting up and, in dry suits and lugging around a cylinder. Overheating from getting dressed in the car park and then walking down to the water is not really comfortable until you're in. We're approaching the 30 hours required to do a Sidemount course, which I think will make our lives much more comfortable. Do you think we should just go for it as soon as we can? If it goes well, buy gear and dive Sidemount, or buying a BCD wing now for back mount singles and wait until later?" So yes, a Sidemount is much better for that because you can literally just carry one cylinder down and lay it sort of on the side or tie it off onto something so that you can then put your cylinders on in the water. It is much better for that. Is it worth investing in a Sidemount BCD sort of straight off the bat? Sidemount really is that sort of separate style of diving where you kind of need a Sidemount specific BCD. So I probably wouldn't. Okay, there's pros and cons on both sides, and Sidemount diving is quite popular nowadays, especially if you do struggle with the kitting and de-kitting. And the benefit of getting your own gear beforehand is that you can take that BCD to your Sidemount course, and your instructor will help you size it up properly so it is fitting you properly. It can also help with trim, because if you're using a school BCD and it's slightly different to the actual BCD that you end up going up with, it means that you have to do a lot of that adjustment yourself. So there is some benefit in getting it as early as possible because you get used to it. One thing that I would do is I'd have a chat with your instructor over which BCD to look at. I've known too many divers, they just go for something that's cheap and cheerful, and then I actually knew one that flew to Mexico to do a Sidemount course, and as soon as he got the BCD out, the instructor just laughed in his face and said, "No, just use one of the school BCDs," and then he returned it and bought the proper thing. So it is worth just having a chat with your instructor. Which BCD would you recommend? But that is a huge leap of faith in that you do enjoy Sidemount diving, and you'll never go down the sort of the back mount route. So what I would personally do is I would probably not invest in a BCD yet. Go on the course, have that conversation with your instructor, see what they use, see what their school BCDs are, and that way you're a bit more savvy on which BCDs and why they chose that specific set and how to adjust it for you personally, and then invest in it, especially if it is something that you are planning to go down sort of the long-term route. There's probably always going to be a case where you can get, or it is worth getting, a single cylinder setup, because I mean I still have single cylinder setups. I've got singles, twins and Sidemount and whatnot, and I still use the singles from time to time. It's just, it's there in your dive locker, in your repertoire, because there are going to be dive trips where it's just like on a liverboard or something, and you just want a single cylinder setup because you throw it on and then 6 steps and you're in the water. So it is kind of worth getting that. But if you're focusing purely on side mount now, then yeah, it is worth investing in your own BCD, but I wouldn't rush to it. I'd have a good conversation with my instructor about which one in particular and why they choose this one, or if there's a newer version, so that's just come out since they've bought that. But yeah, I think most tend to be on like X Deep Stealth, the Apex WSX, either the 25 or the 45, depending on the amount of buoyancy that you need. If you're diving dry suits, it might be worth going for the larger one. And I see some diamonds sort of out there. I don't think we see too many razors anymore, but it is all down to a sort of personal preference. But have a good chat with your instructor as early as possible, and just have that conversation. dvnultimate says, hi Mark, does 5 + 2 = 7? Yes. With words, if you layer a thermocline or a lavacore, etc. with a 5mm wetsuit, do you get the same exposure protection with a 7mm semi-dry? Ooh, that's a good question. If you get, well, it probably wouldn't be the same as a semi-dry, because semi-dries have the better seals, better zips, and usually integrated hoods to really slow the water from even getting into the suit. But would multiple layers be better than one thick layer is basically the question there. For insulation, so most of the, yeah, this is a good question. For most of the insulation, the thing that's actually creating the insulation is the bubbles in the foam. So I'd say it's probably better to just have a thicker neoprene. However, the next best is going to be sort of wearing extra layers underneath, because that's always the recommendation for sort of hiking and all that kind of stuff is layers. Layers help because it traps more air, which is the insulating factor. But in the water is a bit of an insulator, but it's not a great insulator. It's more the actual foam material that's creating that insulation. But would a 5mm and a thermocline or thermic or lavacore, would that equate to a 7mm? It's tricky because it is always like sort of personal warmth and whatnot. I'm thinking it's probably going to be a touch less, not by much, but it probably won't be that noticeable neither. You will have that boost, and you are going to have a boost mainly over your core. It's also tricky because of fitting, because if you have a 5mm wetsuit, sorry as I just unravel all of this in my mind as I go through it, you've got a 5mm wetsuit that you wear as a 5mm wetsuit that fits you perfectly, and then you're putting more material underneath it. It sort of creates a bit of compression, so it's going to be snug, mainly in the sleeves. Around the body you usually get a bit more stretch, especially with neoprenes nowadays. But going back to the original question, is it going to be as warm as a 7mm? Probably not, probably a little bit less, just because it is multiple layers and they are working together, but not like sort of as good as just a real thick extra 2mm of neoprene. It's a good question, and it's a little out of my like thermodynamic wheelhouse. I'm not a savant at those kind of things, but yeah, if I had a 7mm wetsuit and my 5mm and a neoprene alternative. One other thing is that neoprene alternatives are neutrally buoyant, so you wouldn't need the lead. God, this is a rabbit hole. But I don't think it will be quite as warm. I could be wrong. I don't think I've ever conducted this sort of experiment. I have worn those neoprene alternatives and they do work. They are thermal. But I think a warmer option is just the thicker wetsuit, especially a semi-dry. Yeah, no, that's a good question. Ben Heckendorn says, as you said on the video about Dsmbs, you wouldn't send more than 2 to the surface. So my question is, if I were in a group of, let's say, then divers, shall I choose to send the buoys on either ends so the boat would know the divers are between those buoys, or is there no real rule? No, there's no like hard fast rule of it has to be these specific divers. It's more of a judgment call in the water. What I was trying to sort of allude to there was don't just everyone send up buoys, because then you have a lot of hardware just in the water column, and with everything moving and a lot of divers end up sort of drifting and not paying too much attention. All those lines just end up tangling, and it is just a bit of a mess. So it's better if you're in a pretty tight group, if one person sends up a Dsmb, that's perfectly fine, as long as you're relatively close to that buoy. If one or a buddy pair starts to separate from the group, then send up a buoy. If you're in a relatively long group, yeah, if 2 people on the boat extremities send up the buoy, that's kind of perfect, because I don't know any boat or responsible boat owner that would go between those buoys given the chance. So the entire long group is going to be relatively safe between those points. But I don't think there's any like hard fast rule of, oh, if you're this sort of diver at this particular time, you send up a buoy. It's just a judgment call. If you can be fairly close to a buoy, then that's fine. There's no point in sending up a second. But if you're in an elongated group that's spaced out, then yeah, it is worth someone else sending up a buoy. It's just try not to be too close to someone else with a buoy up, because the lines can end up sort of twisting around one another. And especially when people are surfacing, a lot of the time the line gets slack. And the buoy can drift, so then the line is diagonal, so it is just worth not getting too close to someone else who has a buoy up. Daniel Ricardo says, any tips on how to handle a buoy when you need to drag it along throughout the dive? Yeah, give it to your buddy. Towing a surface marker buoy sucks, especially when there's wind and you're swimming against the wind, because everyone else in the group isn't affected by that wind, but you are. And so my main thing was, don't pay out any extra line, because the first time I did that, you learn not to. It suddenly becomes this anchor, and if you pay out too much line, then of course that line becomes diagonal, and then when you swim forwards, the buoy digs down into the water, and then it gets harder to pull, and then it lifts back up, so it kind of digs in that zigzag. So try and keep minimal line. It's very tempting just to pay out more line because it's a lot easier, but it is just kind of grin and bear it. But also try not to get too far to the back of the group, because as soon as that happens, you start to get left behind. Let the other divers know that, you know, this sucks, and I'm going through a lot of extra work, and try and work as a team. So every like 5 minutes or something, just swap it over, give it to your buddy so that they know, oh yeah, this sucks, and they give you a bit more slack. So yeah, if you can, don't be the person with the buoy. Don't pay out too much extra line, especially if you're swimming into the wind effectively. And yeah, just try and share the burden, because it does suck if you have to carry it for the entire dive. Second question from dvnultimate. No quarter turn anymore. When was that dropped? It's about a year now. It was probably like February last year. I think it was Dan. I think Dan released an article about the quarter turn rule, and how it had been, or potentially been, a cause of a fair amount of incidents. And then like social media just jumped on it, and it was like the big hot topic for about a month or so. But yeah, no, we don't do quarter turns anymore. The main reasons is that valves nowadays don't work the same way. The quarter turn was one of those rules where It was all to do with the way that the valve was set up. They had a second seal on the outside when it was unscrewed. So if you unscrewed it all the way, there was a chance that that valve could stick in the open position. So divers would do it all the way open and then a quarter turn back. That way, if they needed to shut the valve in an emergency, it was free to move. However, what that did allow for was for people to get confused about lefty loosey, righty tighty, and they would end up, because the valve could turn freely, they were unsure which way, they would screw it all the way in, effectively closing the valve and then opening it a quarter turn only. You look at your gauges, the gauges say you've got a full tank of gas, you go on the dive and you can draw gas from a valve that is only a quarter turn open, but when you really need to demand gas, it limits it. And especially deep down where you need to get a larger volume of gas to fill your lungs up, if you inhale at certain choke points, the speed of the gas would actually reach the speed of sound and create an actual choke point and just stop the gas for a bit. So you'd inhale and it had actually caused some incidents. I can't remember whether it caused any fatalities, but there were definitely incidents where this was or potentially was a contributing factor. So now with modern valve designs, we don't really have that issue anymore. You can open it all the way. They've changed the insides and all the sealing surfaces. So if you open it all the way, there's very little chance of it actually sticking. So that is actually the current recommendations, to open it very slowly, let your regulators charge up, often with holding down the purge button. And then as soon as you hear that hiss, you let go of the purge button, you hear it charge up, and then you can open that cylinder valve all the way open, and that's it. I mean, don't wrench it open, the same as wrenching it closed, because you're going to damage that sealing surface, or you're going to damage the screw threads. But yeah, no, we don't do the quarter turn anymore. It's just not worth it, and the main thing was it just allowed ambiguity, because people weren't sure if it was all the way open or all the way closed. And yeah, the other recommendation is just be very aware of anybody like adjusting that valve for you. You see it quite a lot on dive boats. I don't think you see it quite as much anymore, but the boat crew, you don't tend to notice this, but as you're getting ready to do your giant stride, they actually check your tank valve for you. So I don't think they do it quite as much anymore for this exact reason. But yeah, just make sure that you know that your valve is all the way open, because then you're very sure if it's very open or closed as soon as you see that needle disappear. And finally, Trevor Gale says, how tight should it be? I purchased a Mares 543 wetsuit online. When I got it, I tried it on too tight, I thought. When diving, after the dive, it was a perfect fit. It seems everything moved where it should be and fitted me like a glove, and very warm. Given the flexibility of the modern wetsuit neoprene, my advice is to find one that is perhaps a bit too snug. Yeah, this is another tricky one of how tight should your wetsuit be, and it's a very personal thing, but you really hit that nail on the head, is that as soon as you get it wet, everything kind of slides into place and everything sort of moves, and then it does fit you properly. It's hard because you can't quantify it. There's no easy way of like determining if a wetsuit fits someone properly. It's just kind of how they feel in it, and when you're quite new to diving, you don't know how tight your wetsuit should feel. They do need to be snug because they're limiting water from getting in, and you want a minimal sort of layer of water inside of your wetsuit. So when you do first try it on, it should feel quite tight. Not tight so that your hands are changing color, or you feel that it's literally choking you, or you start to get headaches or something, or feel lightheaded, then it's definitely too tight. But my usual trick, which was you put the wetsuit on, you get it all done up, and then if you take a knee So kneel down with one knee, and then with the opposite arm, see if you can touch the back of your neck as if you're doing a shutdown drill. If you can do that and it didn't feel too tight across the chest or too restrictive anywhere, then it should be a pretty good fit. Because when you put on a wetsuit, certain sections, especially on limbs, are a bit stretched where the others are a bit bunched up, just in the way that you put it on. It tends to be that you put it on, and then the upper section is quite stretched, so the elbow is a little bit further down your arm. But then as soon as you get it wet and you jump in the water, then all that material starts to sort of lubricate. The tension in the shoulders starts to go away as that neoprene on the sleeve starts to ride up into its right position. And with the body as well, it just tends to bend and flex and just kind of seats. So yeah, that kind of is it. The only downside is when you're kind of in the middle of two sizes. If you're smack dab in the middle of of one particular size in the size chart, perfect, you're living life easy. But if you're on that sort of outskirts, do you go for the larger size or the smaller size? It's one of those judgment calls that you kind of have to try on, unfortunately. I usually recommend going for the larger size just because it's less likely to choke you out or cut off blood supply. However, if it's too big, then it's just going to allow water to flush in and around the suit, so you're going to end up getting cold. It is one of those things that you just have to try on. But yeah, if it does feel quite snug, don't worry too much. The downside of getting it wet to see if it does finally try is that a lot of sort of places won't take that return because you've technically used it, and they can't put that back into stock. And there's nothing faulty with the suit, it's just it didn't fit you. So technically it's yours, so it is a bit of a gamble if you do try that. And that's it for another week. Great questions this week. Sidemount BCDs, is it worth getting a Sidemount BCD sort of as soon as you do the course? Probably, because they're very specialist. There's no one BCD that will do both singles or twins and side mount as well. That's a bit of a unicorn that doesn't really exist too well. Side mount BCDs are very specialist, and it is better if you can invest in your own so that you can size it up properly. Basic mathematics. So yeah, if you wear a 5mm wetsuit and like a 2mm underneath it, does it become a 7mm? Sort of, but probably not exactly. I'd prefer just a single piece of neoprene. I don't really know if there's sort of any science behind that logic in my head. I think it's just for sort of ease and everything moving sort of inside of the suit. Dsmbs, if you're diving in a large-ish group, is there any rule of when to send up boys or who should send up boys? No real hard fast rules. It's just, yeah, don't send too many up too close to one another, and it's always best if you can circulate who actually does it, or at least so that you get enough practice. So if you want to, yeah, just send up your own Dsmb. Just give yourself enough space away from the next diver, and that way you're not going to get tangled up. Towing tips: if you have to tow a surface marker buoy behind you, yeah, it's not easy. If you can, give it to your buddy. The quarter turn rule, yeah, we don't do that anymore. It's just safety nowadays, and modern valves don't require that quarter turn rule, so just open it all the way, finger tight, don't really wrench it open. But always look at your gauges when you're checking your regulators. Make sure that needle doesn't quiver when you inhale. And wetsuit fitting, how tight should your wetsuit be? But if you've got any questions, let me know down in the comments below, and try and use that hashtag #AskMark, and it just filters it so that I can find it that much easier for next week's show. Thank you so very much for watching, everybody, and of course, safe diving.